Hello, I'm Rory McKiernan and welcome to the Love and Courage podcast. I have an incredible episode for you. Make sure you have the time to listen to this and take it all in. It's a really remarkable story, or a story of true love and courage. And I recorded this episode during a recent visit to New York City. I was there with Narrative 4, the global empathy building nonprofit that I joined recently as their European director. Narrative 4 trains teachers, youth workers, community leaders and others as facilitators in a powerful process known as the Story Exchange. That's where people get together to go deeper in understanding themselves and each other by exchanging personal stories on themes such as courage and compassion, and then relaying the other person's story back to a whole group. It needs to almost be experienced, to be seen, to be understood, to be really felt at a deep level. And I'd encourage people to check it out. Consider hosting or bringing Story Exchange to your community to participate in one of the trainings. Perhaps it's mainly targeted at young people, through teachers and youth workers, but it often has been done with doctors, academics, business leaders, politicians and others. You can check it out, narrative4.com. That's the number 4, narrative4.com. You can email me anytime on this or anything at podcast@loveandcourage.org. I'm going to tell you about the guest in this episode shortly, but first I want to share some big news about my book, Hitching for Hope, A Journey into the Heart and Soul of Ireland, which is about to go on release in Ireland, the UK and elsewhere, with the North American release due a little bit later in the year. That's due in May. I'm excited to say that the book has already been getting great reviews, and I've now lined up an 8-location tour where I'll be hitchhiking to each launch and hearing people's voices and stories along the way. And I'll be starting with a visit to none other than the President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins, on March 25th. Then it's on to my first launch in Eason's O'Connell Street at 6 p.m, March 26th, where I'll be joined by special guests Lynn Ruan and Francis Black. I'll be doing lots of TV and radio around this time too, and then hitching on through County Meath into Navan on to lunchtime launch in Eason's Cavan Town, then my hometown Cootehill on the evening of March 28th. So Cavan and Cootehill both on the 28th, then to Central Hotel with Four Masters Bookshop and my pal Keith Corcoran. That's on the evening of the 30th. Dubray Books Galway, 6:30 p.m. with Lorna Siggins on the 31st. Limerick with Tom Prendergast, 6:30 p.m. on April 1st. Waterstones Cork with Brian O'Connell, 7 p.m. on April 2nd. And finishing with Tony Griffin in Lahinch Bookshop, 6:30 p.m. on April 4th. It's going to be big, it's going to be huge, and I'm really excited about it. Speaking of Tony Griffin, I'm hosting a live Love and Courage podcast event at Glore Theatre, April 15th with Tony Griffin. Tickets are on sale now. Discounts 20% for groups of 5 or over. Tony's the co-founder of the SOAR Foundation. He's an author, charity founder, an amazing human being, a former All-Star Clare hurler, of course, as well. So back to the book. It's going to be an amazing few weeks. I'm ready to rock. I have Chelsea Green and Gil Hess and others championing the book, but I do need more support, more resources, anything that you can do or offer, whether it be 5 minutes, 1 minute, 10 hours, whatever it is. I really do need help to pull this off. Particularly promoting the book launches, attending the book launches, and I need posters put up. I need so many things done. I don't know how I'm going to do it all, but I just trust that it'll happen. The book is for sale now on pre-order on Eason's, Amazon, Dubray and other websites and bookshops, independent bookshops as well. Hitchingforhope.com has links. It's really, really important that people buy a book. Not for me, I don't make too much money out of it, but it helps it get into the charts, it helps it get visibility, and it helps it spread. So if you can buy one, or ideally buy lots of books, Christmas books, I don't know, whatever gifts might be coming up that you need, or workplaces could buy a stack for gifts for clients or use for competitions. I don't want to push it too hard, but now's the time to sell it, and I really do need your support. So it's Hitching for Hope, A Journey into the Heart and Soul of Ireland, and a huge thanks to everyone who has supported me to get this far, including podcast patrons, anyone who's chipped in, championed, supported, egged me on. It really makes a huge difference. I'm very, very, truly grateful for the support. Again, hitchingforhope.com, and you can email podcast@loveandcourage.org. Now, back to this episode of the Love and Courage podcast. It's a very special conversation with a very special man, Joe Farrell. Joe is a man who was born into a mother and baby home in Ireland in 1960, where he lived with his mother, who'd been sent there as an unmarried mother. He lived there for the first 2 years of his life before being adopted by an Irish-American family and then brought to the United States. It's a remarkable story. This is the story of his life, his quest for identity, for understanding, for healing, and for peace. Joe is a writer who supports his work by working in the New York City restaurant business, and his forthcoming play is about his time as a student in an all-boys Jesuit high school. It's titled Now and at the Hour. And he also has another upcoming stage play titled The Original, and that's about his search for the original photo, an original photo of his birth mother, and subsequent discovery and meeting of her surviving nephews and nieces in County Clare and in London. I have a feeling that Joe's story, as you're about to hear, I have a feeling this story is going to travel far and wide. Hopefully it becomes the theatre production soon that he's planning, and perhaps a movie, perhaps a book. I don't know what needs to happen, but I think it deserves to be seen, heard, listened to, understood, and discussed far and wide. It's an inspiration, his story. He's an inspiration, and it was a true privilege that he made time to share his story with me, and I feel really honoured that I now get to share it with you. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Joe Farrell. Joe, thanks for joining me on the Love and Courage podcast. We're downtown New York and I can hear sirens and drills and all sorts of noise, but thankfully we've got a nice quiet place to chat, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Well, thanks very much. Welcome to New York.
Thanks, Joe. And you're would you say you're a New York man? I mean, I have a sense of you as being I don't know that much about you, but
I have. I'm actually going to be 60 at the end of the month, so I've been here for over 57 years.
Yeah.
I've been
okay,
here
so
for
you're
a long time.
you're a New Yorker.
Yes.
And you work downtown.
Yes, I work just in this area, not far from where you're staying.
What's your feeling in New York? What's your relationship with the city?
I've had a relationship with the city since I was a kid, because I grew up on Long Island, just about 20 miles east of here, and I commuted into the city to go to a Jesuit High School. So I went to the same high school that my father commuted to, from the same town on Long Island, and so I've been in the city since 1974. I mean, a long time.
That's quite a commute. I've actually never been to Long Island, but it's a bit of a trek, isn't it?
You're taking bus and subway about an hour and 20 minutes or so.
Each way to school.
Each way to school, and so that's an hour and 20 minutes to school, an hour and 20 minutes home, and it's a good time to do homework, by the way. Which is what I did.
And did you become, was it all homework? Were you a reader? Like, this is pre-podcast?
Yes, it was. I was pre-podcast or anything with headphones. So it was pretty much cramming your homework in the morning and then pretty much in the afternoon, because you've been studying. And I went to a Jesuit high school, so it was not a piece of cake, as they would say. It was difficult. It was hard. They were really demanding teachers, and I was surrounded by amazing students, which I was not. I was what I call the gentleman C. I got the average grade. But by the afternoon, you were just so tired and from a full day of classes and, grueling classes, that you would just sleep on the subway and then get home and then try to cram a few hours of homework in which I didn't. As I said, I was
the next morning.
I'll do it the next morning.
I think homework should be banned anyway. Finland consistently ranks as world's #1 in education.
Yes.
They've mostly done away with homework.
And having taught myself, I realized that I had to grade that homework. So I thought, I'm not going to get that much homework as a teacher. So I've done that also.
So you were a teacher?
Yeah. So my story is that, I went to a Jesuit high school, went to a Jesuit college. I was in advertising for a year in New York, worked for a small advertising agency where we did mass transit advertising through our buses, trains, systems throughout the States.
And after a year, you realized this wasn't
Well, I thought about going into the Jesuits, becoming a priest.
Wow.
So I thought, well, if I really want to do that, and the Jesuits are a teaching order, they were my teachers for 8 years, I thought, well, let me try to be a teacher. So I taught for a year at a Christian Brothers School, and that's where I taught for a year. And then after that year, I went into the Jesuits, and I was in the Jesuits for just a little over 3 years.
Oh, wow.
Studying for the priesthood.
And what was that? People often talk about, you don't hear it obviously as much these days, but that notion of feeling a calling or a vocation.
It's funny you say that. In my Jesuit high school times, between the ages of, for us in the States, it's the ages of 14 to 18, I did tell a teacher, a Jesuit priest I had, that I thought about becoming a Jesuit, a priest. And he said that I should get those thoughts out of my head and just be a student. And I was probably about 16 when I said that to him. But he became one of my favorite teachers because he was so honest with me. And I just wrote to him just probably about a year ago asking for something that he said in class. And so I have fond memories of that. And I'm glad he told me to
Yeah,
wait.
that's interesting. He didn't tell you not to become a Jesuit.
He just said, you know what, put it off.
Yeah,
You're a student.
Yeah.
You know, because he himself went into the Jesuits
Yeah.
at 18, right out of high school.
And what was the appeal there?
I think these were great teachers. I really enjoyed what they were doing. Some of them were not so great.
Yeah.
I've actually written about them. And some were just amazing, powerful educators to me. Great storytellers. That they cared. And, you know, as they say, they were men for others. They really did care about who they were teaching.
Okay, wow. So we'll go back to the Long Island, if you
Yes.
don't mind. And you just tell me about your parents. You'd mentioned your dad went to that school. And
Yeah, my father went to that school. He also, I guess I should also say that, you know, I was a very, I guess, different Irish Catholic background because, as I told you off the microphone, that I was born in County Westmeath, you know, in one of the 7 mother baby homes in, you know, almost, you know, 60 years ago. And I lived there until I was adopted by this family in New York when I was 27 months old. My aunt and uncle, my mother's sister and brother-in-law, were on their honeymoon, and they picked me up from this home outside of Mullingar and brought me back to the States. So it was a very different kind of a family. They had a child of their own. They adopted me. A few years later, they adopted another boy from Ireland. Then a few years after that, they adopted a little girl from Toronto, Canada. And so we had a very different kind of family. Then they had a child of their own again. So we had 5 children, 3 adopted, 2 were not. And, you know, my parents were, you know, my father was a lawyer. He was also involved in politics. So he had a political career going on. And my mother stayed home with 5 of us, very different personalities. And
what were they both like as individuals?
My father was somebody who was a hero of mine, is a hero of mine. He's still, you know, around. He's 89 years old. My mom's 87. They've been married, you know, 63 years. They're amazing people. They're dynamic, but they're not the Irish parent that, you know, was, you know, one's loud and the other's not. You know, my father was sort of stern, serious, has a great sense of humor. My mother was pretty much the rule maker, you know, and you didn't cross her. She was the tough one, and she still is the tough one, and if you would ask me.
And were they New Yorkers? Where did they come
Yes,
from?
they were born and raised, probably 3rd generation Irish. You know, their families came over in the 1800s. I wouldn't be surprised because of the famine, what was going on in Ireland in the 1800s. So they've been here. They were born and raised in Long Island themselves. And, you know, my mother was a homemaker, as we say, and my father, you know, was an attorney and then had a political career for about 10 or 12 years himself and went back to being just an attorney.
And were they the Irish Americans that many of us would understand, that they'd, you know, celebrate the culture and be big on St. Patrick's Day and
yes, but, you know,
stay
we have a
connected?
thing, you know, you know, I hate to, and it's sort of derogatory, you know, there's different kinds of Irish, I guess, you know, the Irish that have the flags and they have the pictures of John F. Kennedy in their house. We didn't have that.
Yeah.
I mean, St. Patrick's Day was very important to us. You know, we had the traditional Irish soda bread, and my mother made it very special for my brother and myself, since we were both born there. She really wanted us to remember our Irish heritage. And I guess as Irish are here for more and more generations, it sort of the Irish heritage gets softer and gets maybe watered down.
Yeah.
And
As it should.
yeah,
you know.
but at the same time, you know, my mother wanted us to remember our roots, that, you know, this is where you were born there.
Yeah.
You know, you're Irish.
Well, that's a great gift as well. Yeah.
And we were not American citizens, you know, for many years later. You know, we were Irish citizens up until my brother in his 20s, and I just became an American citizen just actually about 5 months ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was holding on to my Irish citizenship.
Okay.
I guess for some reasons, for personal reasons.
Yeah. And just, if you don't mind, to skip back to, we mentioned JFK there, and obviously there's a big story around Irish America in that. But you did mention also your father being in politics.
Yes.
Was that a JFK Democrat
No, he
inclination or the
wasn't.
other side of the fence?
He wasn't. He was on the other side. He was a
Yeah.
Republican, but what we call...
Of which there are many Irish Americans.
Yes, there are.
Yeah.
And he was what we call a Rockefeller Republican.
Okay.
Nelson Rockefeller was the governor at the time in New York State, and he was a very moderate Republican. And
Yeah, not as we know.
Not as what we know today
Yeah.
in 2018-20. So my father was one of those moderate Republicans who was moving up in leadership of the Republican Party in New York State. And then after a while, I think he realized that, to be a politician and to be an attorney, to have those two careers going at once, it's very difficult to raise your family and be there for your family, because he
Yeah.
was away from our family
Yeah.
for, quite a while.
It's often a big part of political life,
Right.
to balance with family.
Because you're going up to the state capitol,
Yeah,
which is 3
yeah,
hours
yeah.
away from where we lived, and he's up there for 4 or 5 days a week from
Yeah.
January to June during what we
It
call
can't be easy,
the
yeah.
term. Yeah, so we had sometimes a one-parent family for many months of the year, and it's also with the summers we would go out to a summer house, out on the eastern part of Long Island, and there we would be with my mother, for the whole summer, and my father would come out again on Friday, and he would leave on Sunday to go back and do his job as an attorney. So it was, my mother had her hands full.
Yeah, and tell me about life as a teenager in Long Island. Was it, was it parties? Was it fun?
It was fun, all my classmates, I grew up in a very small town that, it was 15 to 18,000, so it's not really that small, but in comparison to the United States, it was a typical town. We had a bunch of churches and public schools, and we had a Catholic grammar school, which I went to for 2 years. Wasn't doing well, so I moved to the public school system. And then I came into the city and left my friends pretty much because I went to a private school in the city where my parents thought I would get, I think, more, not just a better education, but an education that would be geared towards me, to really stimulate me and challenge me, I think, which is what my father carried from his Jesuit education at the same high school.
So that didn't leave you a lot of free time? Yeah.
No, it didn't. I really
Yeah.
felt like I had a job when I went on the train and the bus,
Yeah.
and went to school for 7-8 hours a day, and then train and the bus back home.
Yeah,
Felt
yeah.
like
And
a
what about the
full-time job.
summer times?
Sometimes, early part was just hitting the beach as a kid or getting odd jobs, and then pretty much when I hit 16, I was working every summer. Because
Yeah.
I loved working.
It strikes me as a pretty relatively happy childhood.
It was, a very strict mother, and she's stern, and also going to a Jesuit High School, it was very strict, very stern. It was I will say that it wasn't the best of memories of a high school. There were people that I really do remember, and some I remember, but not fondly.
Yeah.
And I'm glad
Yeah.
I got through it, as they say.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you often hear this thing about school days are the best days of your life. It was
Yeah.
like, whose life?
Yeah,
They
I
weren't
know.
for me.
Yeah,
I mean,
they weren't for me either.
most are possibly half.
Yeah.
Students can't wait to get out of there.
Right.
And yeah, I suppose especially if you've, a free spirit, it doesn't lend itself to being sitting still for 8 hours a day or whatever.
No. I mean, most of my time I just want to look out the window and dream.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess you mentioned earlier that you're doing a lot of writing, and I think that dreaming sensibility is an important thing. If that could be harnessed perhaps in the education system, and I know a lot of good teachers and some good curriculum does that, where you catch the dream and work with the dream rather than
Right.
repress it.
Right.
I suppose it's a challenge when you've curriculum to push.
Well, there's
through.
one teacher who I think was instrumental in my third and my fourth year of high school, who really promoted reading, but also, certain writers. He really pushed Eugene O'Neill towards us, who, as an Irish American writer, and then also some of the other writers, George Bernard Shaw, Chekhov, Ibsen, and even J.D. Salinger. He would read his stories to us as 16, 17-year-olds, and this
Yeah.
man's reading stories to us, but we got to hear the story told out loud as opposed to just reading it on the page.
Oh,
So
that's
our
fantastic,
teacher
yeah.
became the storyteller.
Original audiobooks.
Right, exactly. And and I have an uncle, he's passed since, but he was constantly telling, my cousins and his own children these amazing stories that he would just make up on the cuff.
Oh,
and just tell us. And and I always told him, you were my favorite storyteller. And because of him, I think I try to tell stories also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think, is there anything there that, like, how did you end up in advertising? Because often creative storytellers do.
You know, I did, but it was a part of advertising that I wasn't really able to tell stories. It was
Yeah.
just a bit of a clerical
Yeah.
numbers job.
Okay.
And then after I was left the Jesuits, I went into advertising again. And people would always say on the creative side, you have the account side, which is business and numbers, and then the creative side, which is people telling the stories, writing creative. I was on the wrong side again, and I just said, this is so boring. And so I thought, I've always wanted to be an actor, so I left advertising and studied acting at a small studio in New York. And as most actors in New York do, they wait tables, work for a catering company, or bartend, and they try to get job as actors. And I did here and there, little pieces, but mainly in New York, you're finding most of your time is spent supporting yourself and paying for rent.
Yeah.
So that's what I did.
Yeah.
And that's what it seems to have done.
And how did the acting unfold then?
It was good, but I think there was something that was always pulling me back. It was a fear, and as I said, I was adopted. I think I was also I had this fear that I might be noticed. Somebody, my birth mother, might notice where I was, who I was.
Okay.
And in my head, in my heart, I think I still had these feelings that she gave me up for adoption, and I really wasn't coming to terms with that until years later when I did do a search, when I was just hitting 40, and I did my first full search on who was she. And as I was doing that search, I came across these great books, one by Julia Gould, who was a nurse at one of the mother baby homes, I think this one in Cork in Bessborough, and also by a reporter, an Irish reporter by the name of Mike Malloyd, who wrote a book called Banished Babies. And there, for the first time, I found out that these young women, these mothers, did not give up their babies freely. They were actually taken from them. They had no choice in the matter.
And Joe, how was that tension playing out in your life? That it sounds to me like a tension where, with your acting career, it was preventing you from fully immersing yourself.
Well, also, I think with my acting career, I was also I had a bit of a drinking problem, and so I wasn't dealing with that, and I was just sort of constantly, the next day being fuzzy about what happened the day before, and just It was the same thing happening over and over.
And was that, sometimes when you're in your 20s,
it was my 30s now.
It's your 30s, okay.
And so I went to a workshop, and it was dealing with your mother, and the person who gave this workshop, who's well known in the States, John Bradshaw, who does work what they call with the inner child, and he was doing this big workshop of 600 people in this grand hall for 3 days, and he said, we're going to deal with your mother, and if you're adopted, well, then you have a choice to pick your adopted mother or your birth mother to deal with. And I thought, well, I'll deal with my adopted mother because that's the one I know. And then he said this phrase. He said, if you are adopted, you're alcoholic, and you're gay, those are 3 crosses to bear. And the person who I went to this workshop with was an acting coach of mine who was doing this kind of work and studying to be a therapist himself. And I told him a few days later when John Bradshaw had said that, I said, I'm 2 out of 3. And this friend of mine who I'd known, teacher, mentor, who had known for 4 years said, well, what 2 are you? And I said, well, I'm gay and I'm adopted. And he said, I know you're adopted. I didn't know you're gay. And he'd known me for 4 years. I was still being closeted. And I'd been in a relationship, wasn't in a relationship for 4 years at the time, with a man. And then all of a sudden he said, well, what about the drinking part? I said, well, I haven't had a drink in 23 days. And he goes, oh. And he invited me to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting that afternoon. I went. And that's over 27 years ago that I've been clean and sober. So that started the cobwebs, the fuzziness, we say the definition of insanity is taking the same action over and over, expecting different results each time, and you don't.
Well, it sounds like that acting workshop was, such a defining moment.
Yeah, it was. And to hear this man talk about himself and this friend, he had talked about himself freely about his recovery for 4 years. And I just thought, go back to drinking, it's so boring. And to finally get onto this road of recovery, that it did change my life and that it helped me start to do some outside work on the inside with, who was I, what feelings I had from my birth mother. And then to do this search and find out very little information about her, that she died when I did my search in 2000, that she died of cancer. She had no living relatives. And here was a Xerox photograph of her, and from her mass card, her funeral mass card, which I couldn't tell who she was because it was just a Xerox of what we call it. You might call it a photocopy. We call it a Xerox, and it was just a black line of her face, some dots for eyes, and I left it at that. And 2 years later, something inside me said, when I went to this Irish Iberian gift shop, and I saw photos of Ireland, I said, I have to get the original photograph. And so I went on a search before Google, before the internet was really kicking in 2002, and I spent the next 3 months searching and just chatting with people online in Ireland. One was somebody who's become a friend, 18 years ago, who had photographs of the west coast of Ireland, and I said, you have photographs of an area that I think my birth mother's from, and wrote to the director of a library in Ennis, saying, do you have a death notice? I'm looking for a death notice of my birth mother. And there I was told that she actually had a sister, when I was told she didn't, and that she had nephews and nieces that survived her.
And who told you she didn't?
This nun who had the records of all the homes from those 7 homes, and she was based out of Cork.
So she straight out lied?
Yeah, she gave me misinformation. Yeah, she did. But she put names in there. And it's funny, I got the letter. I was just turning...
So it's beyond lying. It's
yeah, it was. And, it's funny, I get the letter. I was just about to turn 40 in 2000, and I get this letter, and I see it's from Ireland. And I read the letter, and I see, that she died in 1987. And I don't... my partner reads it, and he said, wow, what a beautiful first name. And I must have skimmed over it. And I read the letter 3 times, and I didn't see her name in the letter. So that was something fascinating that I missed it. But her name was Nora Curtin, and she died when she was 53. And she had me when she was 26. She stayed with me until I was adopted, and then spent the rest of her life in London, and came back to see her family every, the holidays, Christmas, and the summer vacations from London back to County Clare, where her sister and her nephews and nieces were living. So as I did my search, to find out who this Nora Curtin was, I found out that she did have a sister and these nephews and nieces. And then this friend who, from Kilrush said, here's the name of the postmistress. She knows everybody in this part of Clare.
So you had a friend from Kilrush, you knew?
Well, someone? I met him, this person who, Pat Cusack, who I met just online. And I didn't meet him until, I think it was just 4 months ago, when he came to the States with his wife for a quick visit, and we finally met 19 years later.
Okay, so you were researching online, you found this guy in Clare?
And also I met somebody who worked for the Postal Service in Dublin who said she would go to the Hall of Records and check for me, and she checked to make sure that I was contacting the right people. So I had these people these little, if you want to call them angels, whatever, they were just people who said, let me help you, I'll do anything I can. And I'm talking a few months later to this woman, Kitty Clancy in Kilrush, who was the postmistress, who's now retired. And she said, oh, I know the family. And she said, I knew your birth mother. And her sister passed away 2 years after her. But some of the nephews and nieces still live there, and some are in England. And she said, would you like their name and number? Just down the road in Clare. And I said, no, it's fine. And I then had to go online and check, and a few hours later I was talking to this gentleman who is my first cousin, and he didn't know about me, didn't really know much about his aunt's past, what had happened. And so I said, he said, well, come over and we'll have a sit down. And as we hung up the conversation, I had been reading books, as I told you about, by this Irish former nurse at a mother-baby home, Mike Malloy, the Irish reporter, and also by different authors who really told stories about the Irish fathers and the Irish men. And I got a sense that, okay, this guy is a little quiet, a little tight-lipped. I may have to send him some more information about myself. So I wrote a little biography about myself, autobiography, and waited to hear back from him about, and I sent him a picture of my birth certificate that I'd gotten with my birth mother's name on it and my original name on it, and heard nothing. And then a few weeks after that, I got a call. It was an Irish woman on the phone, and she was calling from London, and she was his sister, my first cousin. And I told her that, this is who I am. And it was just amazing to feel this sense of connection finally, that here are some people that were connected to me. And I said, well, I'm going to try to get over to Ireland, and let me see if I can get to London too. And I was over there, a month after the phone call to London, where I got the original photographs of my birth mother, meeting these first cousins, 3 of them, and then went back to Ireland and saw where my birth mother was buried in Clare, and meeting 2 of her, surviving nephew and a niece.
That must have been very bittersweet kind of feeling to be on the phone and to...
It was, I think, the most bittersweet moment when I was in London, and I got to London 2 days before, and then I got to meet this cousin, which I was very nervous about. And as I was waiting in the train station in Western London, she got out of the car with her husband, and she just put her hand to her face, and she said, "You look just like..." You never hear the words, "You look like so-and-so." And I never knew who I looked like. And that's what I said to my mother. I just wish I knew that I looked like somebody. And I sort of get caught with those feelings now, because here I got to see the photographs. And I do look like my birth mother. Because as you're growing up, you can look at your mom and your dad and say, well, I'm going to look like them. And I was this short little kid. I was 5'4" at 14. I was 5'4" at 18. And I thought, God, I'm going to be this short little Irish kid for the rest of my life. And at 18, I blew up, 7 inches that summer. Became 5'11". And that was unexpected to me. As my mother said, well, you're just one of those late bloomers. But I never knew who I looked like. And here I did. I saw photographs of a woman who took care of me for 27 months of my life, and who I looked like. And these nephews and nieces who knew her and said, you look just like her. So it was that's the bittersweet moment for me. Because you look at your siblings, and we all look very different. And 2 of my sisters who are not adopted, they look like my mother and my father. My brother adopted, my sister adopted. We don't look like anybody. And my sister did find her birth mother from Toronto, and looks just like a spitting image of her birth mother. And still has a relationship 25 years later with her birth mother. And I at least always wanted a photograph of my birth mother. I didn't want to meet her, because I didn't want to find out why she gave me up. And then to find out, years and years later, that she had no choice in the matter. That the story was, you either married the person who was the father, or you stayed here and you had the baby taken away from you by a couple that was going to adopt you, either from Ireland or from the States. And
did you ever get to paint that picture of who your biological father might be?
I always wanted to know, and with 23andMe, I did a search and found somebody who was close, I guess, in the DNA, and I told them a little story about myself and never heard from them again, so could be a connection there. And as people always say, do you know who your birth father is? I've always said, and I've said it since I was probably in my 20s, it may have not been the most pleasant of situations, the getting pregnant.
Is that your intuition?
I don't know, because I know my birth mother from my cousin's, storytelling, that they said that she left home at 16 or so and went, a few towns over to Kilrush, where she works as a shopkeeper. And she probably lived with the family, and she stayed there until she got pregnant and left, Clare, and went to Westmeath to Mother Baby Home and had me, and was forced to stay there with me and care for me. And then when I was adopted, and then she left, she stayed there another month, and then went to London for the rest of her life, and came to visit her family for the next next 20 or so years.
People that don't necessarily know the full backstory to Mother and Baby Homes, it wasn't that she necessarily just went there, it was that she was compelled to go there.
Exactly.
By church, state, and
Yeah.
society to a large extent.
Right.
But certainly the church dominance in Ireland at the time, unmarried mothers weren't accepted.
And what is sort of interesting is that the church who ran these homes, the nuns were running them, but also with the backing of the church and the government.
Yeah, the state was very much involved.
And finding out information through reporters, people who, presented articles out there that, they were getting funding. And then there's stories, it's sort of, dark secrets that, did these families pay money for the adoptions? My parents have said, no, they didn't. And I believe them, but I hear other stories where parents, families did, spend some money, to help with, the process of adopting.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's a whole nother realm, isn't it? And whether how much those families may have known, or because I mean, it's many years later now. Although the last mother and baby home didn't close until the 90s, which is quite stunning, really. But for the most part, where that era has mostly passed us, but many survivors are still alive, so it's not fully in the past. But it was in some ways a different time where we didn't know as much as we now know. Like, we're still learning.
Right.
So it may be conceivable that visiting couples just didn't know what the deal was and what was presented to them, and it's a whole nother realm, isn't it?
It is. But, and I went to meet this nun who had the records and gave me this misinformation 2 years after I found out who my birth mother was. And I met her outside of Cork City, and I really went there with no, I guess, anger in my heart, because I thought, she was just this little nun. I won't say sweet little nun. She was just this little nun. And I just said, the information you gave me was wrong. And I didn't go on an attack to blame her. I just said that was wrong. And, my birth mother did not die of cancer, because I saw her death certificate, and that she died of, I guess, the effects of drinking. And my cousin, when I met her for the first time in London, she said, I'll show you the death certificate. And I saw the death certificate, and I knew why she died. And I said to her, if there's one thing I inherited from her, it's also a drinking problem. But I was lucky enough to get sober 8 years, actually at the time it was 10 years before. And so I got sober at 32. And so to see that she had a drinking problem the rest of her life, that, there was a pain there that she was not able to heal. And that my being sober and staying sober could be something as a sign of respect for her. And that I got it, and I will hold and cherish this gift that I have, this opportunity to not drink one day at a time. So I told this nun that, I know that she didn't die of cancer, because I thought if she died of cancer, as I was finding out this information in 2000 and in 2002, it was totally a different story. I thought, okay, this nun just was the holder of the records, and that's all she was. And then, years after that, to see, the movie Philomena come out, which, was, many people don't know, is based on a book, which was a different point of view, that the book was really based on the son's point of view and not the mother. And the film, of course, dealt with the mother, because she was alive and looking for her son. And to find out that, that was some of my story, that, I went, to look in 1984. I was going to the Jesuits, into the seminary, and I went to the home where I was born. Just wanted to see the physical building. But what I didn't tell my adopted parents who were with me in this little trip, I wanted to see the cemetery. I wanted to see if she was buried there. And she wasn't, because I wanted to put some peace of mind that maybe she was buried. Maybe she died childbirth, and I can have some peace. But she wasn't. And so when I traveled through Ireland in 1984 at the age of 24 and traveled to London, I had this fear that people might notice me, might recognize me, because I really didn't change since I was a little child. I had the same look. But, that was my story. And then all of a sudden, I guess, when I found out that she had passed away, I had a sense of freedom that, I don't have to deal with that part of what I thought would be a rejection. But now that I found out, the story changed dramatically 2 years after that, to find out that she didn't give me up of free will. It was not part of, the process. That's not how it dealt with. So.
And you said you were traveling around Ireland with your adopted parents and had to hold this parallel journey.
Yeah, well, I said, look, I'm going to the Jesuits. This is the end of the summer of 1984. I said, I'm going to go to Ireland, go to the continent. And so my parents said, could we go with you? I thought,
oh dear.
Really? And I said, you know what? Sure. And then my younger sister, who was 11 at the time, said, can I go also? So the four of us traveled through Ireland. I went to the mother-baby home, which is now closed as a mother-baby home, and it was now a home for mentally disabled adults. So it's a care facility for mentally disabled adults. And, I got to see the grounds of this, old mansion, which was, now a home and being used in a different way. And then to go into the seminary for 3.5 years, which I think my reasons for going to the seminary were to sort of, I felt a calling, but I think if I were to really scratch a little, I really wanted to hide. I didn't want to be a gay man. I didn't want to accept that part of me. So I sort of went there to hide, and it wasn't a place to hide from me. It was a place actually to come and get to know me. And so I finally, after 3.5 years, I told the powers that be that I was gay. They weren't too accepting of that. They thought I should move out as soon as possible, which I did the next day, and became another journey of mine, that I went back into the work world, and was sort of asked to leave the Jesuits.
And was the challenge with your sexuality because of the cultural and religious influence of your
I think
upbringing?
So. Yeah.
And society at large?
I think so, and I kept it a secret for the next 1.5 years. Then I came out to my parents, the rest of my family, who were not surprised. They always had an inkling. And, they always had an inkling. They always knew, and they just were waiting for me to say something. And they were very accepting, and my mother and my father became very involved with gay men and women who the AIDS crisis was running rampant through the United States, in the late 80s. And so my mother and father became very involved with people with AIDS. And I didn't ask them to do that. They just thought, well, here is something we can do. Because my parents still are Catholic.
Which is ultimately strikes me as a true Christianity in practice,
Exactly.
Not in theory.
If I have some heroes that are still Catholic, they are my parents. Me, am I still a Catholic? No, I'm not. I believe in a God, but it's not of my understanding. It's something probably use the phrase a higher power, which I gained through becoming clean and sober, and that's the understanding of my God, my higher power. That is somebody that is not me, and it's not the person sitting next to me, and it's not somebody who's pointing a finger at me, or somebody who's saying that they speak for God, but it's something else. It can be a smile, it can be something of nature, it can be something that is just of the universe that I don't understand. And for me, I'm content with that, the mystery.
Yeah, there's I don't know which particular tradition, but certainly in Indigenous First Nations or Native American traditions, there's a term for God as the Great Mystery. And I've always kind of resonated with that, because there's a certain sort of unknownness to it, and humility as well. Like certainly it's a great mystery why you're sitting in front of me today.
Yes.
And to keep trusting that
right.
And I'm sure you meeting Pat Cusack and many other parts of the jigsaw here, we can define it as a linear, logical pursuit of research, but I'm sure there would, as you call them, angels appear in whatever form at whatever time.
Well, when I was traveling through, I've always thought I had this ability to see some things and maybe feel some things, and I felt that since I was a child, and I didn't know what it was.
You call that a sixth sense? Or?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
And I don't go say, it's not a clairvoyance or something like that, but, I've done some spiritual work after leaving the seminary and the Catholic Church, finding different routes and being open to different routes of spirituality and thinking and the universe. And
what does that? What did that look like? Did that mean going on retreats or courses? Or?
I did retreats. When I was in the Jesuits. I did retreats after the Jesuits, and just finding a sense of spirituality and trying different spiritualities. And I think, especially in my search for my roots in Ireland, that when I came to Ireland and I was driving from, I stayed in Galway the night before I was going to meet these cousins in the birthplace where my birth mother lived and grew up. I was a bit lost, and I just put the map to the side, and I said, I know where to go. I just knew where to go. I knew the exact name of the town, but I just said, you know what, I know where to go. And I just traveled these roads out in County Clare, and I got to where I had to go. And I always say that something there that, I may have only been in Ireland for 27 months of my life, but each time I've gone back, I felt something special. I felt a connection that, being in New York for, over 50 years cannot take away from me. And that it is there, it's a special feeling. I don't know what it is sometimes. Sometimes it's a guess, it's a hunch. It's something in my chest that just tells me.
Oh, it's remarkable. I'm curious as to how you have processed a sense of what must have been anger and injustice.
Well, the anger and the injustice, as I said before, I went to a Jesuit high school, and it was difficult. I mean, I had some Jesuits that were the most caring and loving of human beings, and lay teachers. I mean, that to this day I will always hold them as heroes of mine. And then I had some teachers that were not really nice. I mean, they were brutal. And because of one who was physically abusive to many of us in my class, I was not the only one. But, I'm able to write about that, to write a story that happened to me and add something to it to say, what would have happened if somebody had come across me that day where I was beaten up by a teacher in front of my class. And this was after months of abuse for the whole class, myself included. And I thought, years later, when I went into the Jesuits, and I see this same Jesuit who's there, and to be not afraid of him anymore, that he was not this ogre. But also to be careful to say that, I still was not ready to forgive him and forget. And to be out of the Jesuits and to have some, hurt when they were asking me to leave, when I told them that I was gay. And they said, well, one, they didn't think I was, and that I should probably move out the next day and think this over. And I did. And my answer was that they didn't want me. So I left the Jesuits. But in my search over the next 10, 15, 20 years after my time at the Jesuits, I realized that, I could start writing about these stories, these events that happened to me. And one is my search, I always said I wanted an original photograph of my birth mother. I wanted a photograph. And then when I got this Xerox, and I said the words, I want the original. Well, when I then got to meet my cousins and got the original photograph, they said, will we see you again? They kept all saying, will we see you again? Will we see you again? And I thought, bizarre question. And I said, yes. And it wasn't until I was home back in the States, about 2 or 3 months, I was talking to one of them in London, and I said, you always said this question to me. Why do you keep on saying, will we see you again? And they said, well, we didn't want to tell you this, but a year before you showed up, somebody showed up and said they were a long-lost cousin. And so we put him up in someone's cottage in Clare, and we gave him meals, bought him drinks, and for a few days to a week, and we never heard from him again. And so was he pulling a fast one on them, as we say in the States? Was he a bit of a scam artist? Possibly. So they thought, oh, well, am I a scam artist? But I showed up with, my birth certificate that had my birth mother's name on it.
They were in this whole dialogue,
yes,
and a whole nother track.
So they see me and they're thinking, who is this guy? And unbeknownst to me about this story, and they didn't tell me this story, which was very kind of them, to say, are you a scam artist? Which they could have asked me, but they didn't. They were so sweet about it. They sort of kept it back. But while I was there with them, I made sure that I was, I wanted to treat them because they were being so generous and so open to me that I wanted to take care of their meals, their drinks. I wanted to treat them, which I did, and they let me, and I think begrudgingly, but they were also very generous to open their hearts and their homes to me. And then I thought, after I heard that story about this imposter, and he was from Australia, not to besmirch Australians, but he just happened to be Australian, they said, I thought, what would happen if I showed up and this other individual showed up at the same time to this little village looking for his birth mother? And so the story, and it's a one-man show, and it's really about my experience with my take on it. And I think it's my ability as a storyteller. And I have to add in quotations, as an Irish storyteller.
So you're writing this as a play now, or is it finished?
Yeah, it's finished. And I'm just working on it. And it's called The Original. And it's about my trying to get the original photograph, but coming to grips with who my birth mother was and who these people who knew her were, and them finally, seeing that, I am because I love this whole dichotomy of who's this imposter one year and this other person who's a mystery person the following year. And I thought, what if they both showed up at the same time? And what would happen? And so I've come up with, I think it's a fun story. It's sort of a bit, not mystical, but it's sort of fairy tale-ish, that you would tell other people, like, here's a story. And in a fictitious named place.
I can see this being a movie.
Well, it's funny. There are a lot of stories when I've traveled through Ireland since 2002, and I'm going again. I'll be back there in July for a cousin who's passed since I've met her. Her daughter's getting married in July in Clare, and I'll be there for another family wedding, and to be part of their lives, and for them to be part of my life. They've come to visit me and to open my home, my heart to them, to say that you are family. And and they're part of my story, and to take stories and sort of sew them into a fabric that is part truth. I have a friend who tells stories, and she will always start a story by saying, "Most of what I say is true." And I always love that phrase, "Most of what I say." And so for this, the original, most of what it happened is true.
Yeah.
And it's my experience of coming to Ireland.
And you're married now, and that's
I'm
part
married,
of the story too.
And that's part of the story too. And I've traveled to Ireland with my partner and my mother and my father, who wanted to meet my cousins because my parents are part of my adoption story.
Yeah.
And my aunt, who picked me up on her honeymoon with her husband, my uncle, I have not traveled, but her husband left his job after many years and became a painter of Irish scenes and traveled through Ireland during the early 2000s to take photographs and study areas of Ireland. And he passed away a few years back, but he has these amazing paintings that survive him of great Irish landscapes and life. And I feel, he's a part of my story and I'm a part of his story, the Irish storyteller, whether it's through a painting or whether it's through a written story or a story told on stage or a story told in film. Because when I travel through Ireland now, I see, that's a story, there's a story. I see the story and my take on the story, which is very, I add something to that. And hence I came up with the story, the original. And also my time in a Jesuit High School, that I can look back on a very painful experience, a very brutally painful experience. It was psychologically, spiritually, and physically abusive. But how we do survive and how we can look back and heal that memory. And I think that story, which is called Now and at the Hour, it's a 2-character play, and it takes place a few blocks from a Jesuit high school, in a small park in New York City, in the dead of winter, between these two individuals. One is a high school student, and one is this unknown individual, this unknown adult, and how they come to see their connection to each other.
And so the story goes.
Yeah, so the story goes.
Yeah, most of which will be true.
Yeah, it's funny. Years ago, after I sort of was getting out of the acting thing into writing, I was standing behind a very, very well-known American writer. He's a screenwriter, playwright, and I thought, I'm going to blow a lot of hot air up his ass, excuse my language, and just say, I've read everything, I've seen everything you've ever done. And I just tapped him on the shoulder and I just said, thank you for your words. That's the only thing that came out of my mouth. The truth.
Yeah.
Those few words was, thank you for your words. And he asked who I was, and I said, I'm so-and-so, Joe Farrell. I'm an actor. I wait tables, and I'm trying to be a writer. And he just said, you're trying to be a writer? Like, he didn't get that part.
Yeah.
And he said, do you put words to paper? And I said, I do. And then he just poked me in the chest and he said, you're a writer. And that happened, probably 25 years ago.
Did you feel there was a sense of transmission?
I did, and I have to say that I told somebody that story years later, and he said, what did that story do for you? And I said, it's given me a bit of a bruise in my chest, because I will sit in front of paper, I will sit in front of a computer, and my ongoing thought is, I can't write, and my hand just pops into my chest and says, pokes me in the chest, and thumps my chest, says, I'm a writer. So,
is this person still alive?
he is. He's still alive. And
Okay.
I keep his name quiet because one day I want
Yeah.
to say it out loud to the public, because he gave me such a gift. And he's won what we call Tony Awards for theater. He's
Yeah.
won Academy Awards for screenwriting, and he just gave me that gift. And I know he's around New York City and he's in the States somewhere, but he just gave me that gift. And I've tried to do that to other people when they said, "Oh, I'm trying to write." And I said, "Trying to write?
Yeah.
Can I share this story with you?" And I said, "May I just poke you in the chest?" And I poked him in the chest and said, "You're a writer." And it's made me carry on that connection that he gave me, that permission, that proof,
yeah.
that support, when I keep telling myself, I'm not a writer, I can't write, which I think most writers, or most people who are artists or trying to create, even a parent will say that. I am not a good parent, I'm not a good parent. And sometimes they need somebody to say, your kids are still alive, you've kept them alive, they are loved, they love you, you love them, and you should be poked in the chest and say, you're a good parent.
Mm.
So sometimes I say that to people. I say, you know what? You're a good writer, you're a good athlete, you're a good painter.
Mm. I'm minded to say there's something there about not just self-acceptance, but and beyond self-compassion, it's actually to actually fully love yourself as yourself, as a writer or a carpenter or a painter or a parent or whatever it might be. There can be an inclination rather to seek love and permission outside of oneself. Now, it is good to have these travelers on the journey to help us get back on the path, but
because little do we know that each one of us has a story. Mine is different from everyone else's. I feel, your story is special, another person's is special, and I feel mine is special, and that mine being special in that I went these different routes of not wanting to know who my birth mother or birth father was, and then wanting to say, well, let me look into that. Wanting to hide in the seminary and the Jesuits, and getting out of that, and then getting clean and sober, which, they say, the onion is, you peel back the onion, it's more is revealed. But, as you know, onions make us cry as you peel or cut them. So there are some tears there, but there's also this revelation that there's something inside of us. People constantly, I think, and I've done it myself, we look outwards. And the shorter distance to go is really just turn back and look within us. Because once we do that and see who we are through all these other people that have had a part in who we are, the answer's there. I don't have to go to another country and do this search. I don't have to sit on a mountaintop. I can find a place, even in New York, where it's quiet and peaceful, and look within myself, and sometimes poke myself in the chest and saying, the answer is in here. Now, the hard part is to get the answer, and the answer is in some kind of a cohesive way to tell the story. And so I do struggle with that, but I know that I sometimes, as I said before, an earlier phrase is the late bloomer. Sometimes I really believe at 60, almost 60, I really truly am the late bloomer. But I see people who bloom. My uncle wasn't until he was probably in his late 60s, early 70s that he started painting full time, and left, a job that was a management job. And I've seen other writers who have said, 60s and 70, I need to tell this story. Because you look back and people on their deathbeds saying, I didn't tell the story. And so I sometimes have to remind myself that the people who I've seen pass on, that they didn't tell that story that they wanted, they held on to that story. And it could have changed somebody, could have helped somebody. And it could have helped them. And that's the other thing is, as we sometimes help others, we're helping ourselves. They say you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of another person. And I think that is true. You have to be a little selfless, and then with that, you're able to care for others. And if I got that, I guess I got that from my parents. My father and my mother, they do take care of themselves, spiritually. They do have a spiritual life. I can see that in their lives. And I think, not being Catholic anymore, I do have a spiritual life also, that I know I have to keep going and nourishing and letting people into it and letting it out and sharing it with other people, this journey.
And I'm so glad you are doing that, because you've come on the podcast here, and there have been episodes recently that it's staggering to me. I've been listened to in 51 countries. I'm like, who are these people?
Right.
Hello.
Yes.
And we're all the soup of each other's stories. So
Yes.
there could be someone in Pakistan or China or South Africa or Cuba or Chile or Scotland or Wexford,
Yes.
listening to this and receiving and invoking all sorts of their own story. And
Right.
I guess the work I'm doing now with Narrative 4 and other work is about sharing our stories. And I'm glad you are, Joe, and I wish you huge success for whatever form you want that to take.
We'll see. Thank you.
I think you're a great messenger for love and courage.
Well, that is, I think, you see other people's love and courage, and you see as examples, and I call that a power of example. And, sometimes we say, I want what they have. And I think that is true about the love and courage. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay, thank you.
See you in Ireland.
Okay, yes.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Love and Courage podcast. Please do share it far and wide, and remember to check out the archive of other great conversations. Thanks again to all of you patrons who've chipped in and supported the podcast, spread the word and support in whatever way you do. Please do remember to check out my book, Hitching for Hope, A Journey into the Heart and Soul of Ireland. The national tour around Ireland soon, and then tours in the UK, the US, Australia and elsewhere later in the year. You can pre-order the book now through Amazon, Eason's, Debray, independent bookshops, other websites. More info on the book and the launch tour at hitchingforhope.com, Hitching for Hope. And I really, really do appreciate the support in spreading the word on both the podcast and the book. Thanks again, folks. Until next time, here's to you and here's to the journey of love and courage.